Now there was once a man who had a big herd of goats, but he was too busy to look after the goats himself. So he thought he would go to the town and hire a boy. He found a boy who had no father and who was anxious to find work to help his mother. He offered to pay the boy 4 pesos a week, and the boy returned with him to his ranch. The boy turned out to be a very good goat herd. Soon he knew all the goats by name. They would come to him when he called. He could milk the goats fast, and they gave more milk than they had ever given before. But it was a hard life for the boy. Sometimes he was lonely and sad. Well, one morning when he was driving the goats to a pasture in the mountains, he met up with an old woman along the way. He greeted her politely. "Buenos días, abuelita." And she returned his greeting. "Buenos días, le de Dios, nietecito." And she asked him, "What are you doing here?" The boy told her, "Well, as you can see, I'm taking care of these goats." She said, "Oh, yes, I do see. Is it a good life, tending goats?" The boy said, "Well, I can't complain, but sometimes I am hungry." She said, "Oh, take this." She handed him a folded cloth, and she told him that if he would spread out the cloth, it would be covered with good food to eat. He thanked her, but she just waved her hand. "Por nada," she said. "Is there anything else you need?" The boy said, "Well, sometimes I am lonely and sad." She said, "Oh, then take this." She reached under her cloak and she brought out a little violin. The boy said, "Gracias, abuelita, pero yo no sé tocar el violín." "I don't know how to play a violin," he said. She told him, "You can play this violin. It's magical." And she pointed at a little white key at the end of the violin. She told him, "If you turn that key before you play, everyone who hears the music will have to dance." Again the boy thanked her very kindly, but she just waved her hand and she went away. The boy drove the goats on until he came to a good grassy spot, and they settled down to start grazing. He sat down and picked up the violin. He set it under his chin. He drew the bow across the strings. A sweet, sweet melody came drifting out. He spent the whole morning playing music on the violin. And then as midday approached, he began to feel hungry. All his master's wife had sent along for him to eat was a dry crust of bread. He said to himself, "The old woman told the truth about this violin. It really is magical. I'll see if she told the truth about the cloth as well." He spread out the cloth, and he saw the most sumptuous meal he had ever laid eyes on. There was bread and meat and cheese and fresh fruit. There was much more food than he could eat. He ate until he was full, and then he set the rest aside. He folded up the cloth, and then he leaned back against a rock and closed his eyes to take a nap. He sat up with a start because the goats were making frightened noises. The boy looked around. He saw that 2 big coyotes were creeping toward one of the smallest goats in the herd. The boy picked up a big rock to throw at those coyotes. But then he got a different idea. He picked up the violin, he turned the white key at the top, and he drew the bow across the strings. A lively tune sprang from the violin, and the goats stopped making frightened noises. They stood up on their hind legs, and they started dancing. And the two coyotes started dancing too. The boy drew the bow faster, and the goats danced even more wildly. The coyotes' dance was the wildest of all. The boy played and played until his arm was too tired to go on. And when he stopped playing, the goats all fell to the ground exhausted. And the two coyotes also fell to the ground. They fell fast asleep. And when they woke up, they were so happy they forgot all about bothering the goats. They went away wagging their tails. That evening, when the boy arrived home, the goats looked healthier than ever. They gave more milk than they had ever given before. Of course, the boy's master was pleased with that, but he was also a bit suspicious. And his wife was suspicious as well when the boy had no interest in the thin soup she offered him for supper. Now, every day the boy would take his violin and his cloth with him when he went to the mountains with the goats. He would spend the days playing sweet music and eating the good food from the cloth. The goats got more and more healthy, gave more and more milk, and the master got more and more suspicious. Finally, he decided to follow the boy. He watched from behind a bush as the boy sat playing his violin. The master heard the beautiful music that was coming out. And then at noontime, the master saw the boy unfold a cloth. The master's mouth began to water. He had never seen such a meal before. He hurried home to tell his wife what he had seen. She said to him, "Go to the town and buy a cloth that looks just the same as the boy's cloth. Tonight, while he's asleep, we'll take his cloth and put the other one in its place." The man did what his wife suggested, and the next day the boy spent the morning playing music and then unfolded his cloth. He was disappointed to see there was no food, but he shrugged and said, "Bueno, no hay mal ni bien que dure para siempre." It's an old saying, no good thing or bad thing will last forever. He chased away the empty feeling in his stomach with the music of his violin. But when he arrived home that evening, and he saw that the master and his wife were just finishing a big meal, in fact, it looked like they had been eating all day, he realized what was going on. After he milked the goats and settled them for the night, the boy picked up his violin and he went to the master's house. He said, "Master, I can see that you and your wife have just finished a very good meal. Would you like me to play you some music? It might help you digest your food." The master had heard the sweet music the boy could play with his violin, and he thought this would be a perfect ending to the trick he and his wife had played on the boy. They had stuffed themselves with food from the boy's cloth, and then they would let the boy lull them to sleep with the music of his violin. The master said, "Oh yes, boy, play us some music." The boy turned the little white key at the end of his violin, and he started to draw the bow across the strings. Right away, his master started tapping his feet, and his wife started moving about in her chair. The master said, "Boy, play something slower. I don't seem to be able to sit still when you play that music." But the boy didn't play slower. He drew the bow faster across the strings. The master and his wife started dancing around the room. They said to the boy, "Please stop that music." But the boy played faster and faster. They started banging into the walls and stumbling over the furniture. They said, "Stop the music." And the boy said, "Give me back my cloth, and then I'll stop." The master's wife said, "It's under the bread box in the kitchen." The boy went to the kitchen and found his cloth, and then he stopped playing. The master and his wife sat on the floor, gasping, moaning and groaning and rubbing their arms and their legs. And the boy said to the master, "Pay me the money you owe me. I'm not going to work for someone who steals from me." But the master said, "Pay you money? I will have you arrested. That's what I will do." And the next day he went to the village and brought charges against the boy for beating him and his wife. He told the sheriff, "You had better bring along some helpers. That boy is dangerous." When the sheriff and two helpers arrived at the farm, the boy was playing a sweet tune on his violin. And the sheriff said, "Boy, you must come with me. Your master has charged you with beating him and his wife." The boy said, "Oh, of course, I'll be happy to come with you. Just let me finish this tune." The master said to the sheriff, "No, don't let him do it." But the boy had already turned the white key at the end of his violin. He drew the bow across the strings. The sheriff and his two helpers started dancing around the yard, stumbling into ditches and banging their heads against the branches of trees. They hollered at the boy, "Please, please, stop your music." And the boy said, "Tell my master to pay me the money he owes me, and then I will stop." The master struggled to get his hands into his pockets. He pulled out all the money he had and threw it at the boy. He said, "Take it all. Just stop that music." The boy stopped playing his violin. He picked up the money, and then he went back home. He gave all the money to his mother, and then he unfolded his cloth. And while his mother sat eating the delicious food, he played her a sweet melody on his little violin.